Hi, let's talk about fantasy projections and all of the idiots out there focused on accuracy. Next, I'm Aaron. I have a computer science degree and a master's in mathematics, and I'm here to explain to you why accuracy in projections is a stupid thing to focus on. I was arguing with a friend the other day over a nice sushi roll at a nice restaurant locally, and we were talking about fantasy football in particular. And he was yammering on and on about trying to pick the best site that has the most accurate projections. And he was asking me which site that was, as if I could just tell by, like, I just run the numbers all the time and I just have that stored in my head. And it's obvious because I have a degree in math. So why you can't just tell by looking at it? So I had to go on this long rant with him about how focusing on the accuracy of projections is a stupid thing to worry about. Because in predictive science, if you want to call it a science, it's more of an art, predictive whatever, is humans don't experience time that way. We experience time linearly. We experience this moment, this moment, this moment. We don't experience it in a way that we could ever tell with any level of accuracy, even if it's fuzzy, what the future holds from one moment to another. My camera, like, I don't know, my camera, this camera pointed at me right here, could explode and turn into a supermassive black hole that consumes the entire universe and ends all life everywhere forever. And then we all wake up from the matrix or the simulation and in our gel pods and wonder what the hell that, well, I guess that didn't work. Let's try something different. So let's first talk about what projections are, how to use them, and how they are calculated, the various different ways that I've seen that projections are calculated. So you have to think of projections as a comparative metric. You have knowledge about a player, a specific player. You have knowledge about the upcoming game and the opponent, and you have knowledge about the team that that player plays for. And that's all you know. You know what has happened, how the player has performed in the past, you know how his team has performed in the past, and you know how the opponent has performed in the past. And you also have some guesses uh, from places like Vegas, who are odds makers. And by the way, odds makers aren't necessarily trying to be accurate in their predictions of a game. They're trying to entice people to gamble on that game. They're trying to maximize the casino's revenue or the sports book's revenue or whoever it is. That is a special way of calculating those odds that can be useful to make projections, but really are just a single data point in the whole projections calculation thing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to predict what the future will hold. Now, there's a few ways to do this. Some people just do it by feel, the so-called experts and their models where they just line up the players and who they think is going to perform the best given the opponent. They go through some manual analysis and look at rosters and look at depth charts and look at injuries and look at the opposing team, look at a whole bunch of stuff, do a whole bunch of research and everything, and then come to a conclusion, a guesstimation based on past performance, what a particular player might do in the next game. So another method that I've seen more recently, within the last decade or so, is the so-called wisdom of the crowd, which goes a step further than the expert model of a single individual making guesses, effectively guesses, about how players will perform in an upcoming game. And it pulls all those guesses together and comes up with a single metric, an aggregate metric based on those projections from those individual experts. And this is an interesting model because there's some fun things that you can do with the math when you have a bunch of samples, essentially a bunch of guesses from a bunch of people across, whatever spectrum of life, because everybody has their own biases. So everybody's going to make decisions about how they think a player will perform based on those biases. And so if you the thinking is that if you can pull a bunch of those people together, you kind of flatten out the biases. They tend to even out. And so some of the interesting things that you can do with that sample of data is, yes, you can calculate an average, which is typically how it's done with wisdom in the crowd, but you can also calculate um, things like a ceiling and a floor. You have a collection of experts that thinks this particular player is going to perform better than how the others are going to see him. And then you have people that think that players are not going to perform so well. And so you get kind of a spread of data and you get a range, which is a very nice metric to use as a decision point when making lineup decisions. Although it's kind of hard to compare players. It's like, which of those do you focus on? Do you focus on the average, like the expected performance, that individual number? Do you focus on the ceiling? Do you focus on the floor? And I think the guiding advice is to, your ceiling players are for the risk. You want to take more risk, you compare players based on their ceiling. And you want to be more conservative, you compare them based on their floor. So a third method I've seen of calculating projections is using AI or machine learning. Now with this method, instead of taking a whole bunch of experts, and pulling them together and calculating a single number, you effectively take all that information that you know about a player and the game and the stadium and all that stuff, weather, Vegas odds, all of it, and you train a model based on all that historical data that comes up with a single number that predicts the future outcome based on data that we know pregame about a player and all that other stuff. So in a nutshell, you're building a model of a particular position or even a particular player or a team or whatever, and you're using that model to make predictions about the future. And this is typically referred to as a regression model. So linear regression has been around for a while. I mean, multiple linear regression and a whole bunch of different types of regressions, just math under the hood. It's been around for a long time. And it's been used to forecast things like stock prices and housing prices and things like that. So this is how lineup theory does it. This is how I do it. I use machine learning. I have models that I've built that have a bunch of data points in them about pregame stuff. And then it takes that data points, runs it through the equation that the machine learning, the training came up with, and gives you a single number, which is a prediction of the projection. Now, I like this method because in theory, it's unbiased. But in practice, the model itself is going to have biases because people build those models and people have biases about what numbers are important. So the bias is determining which numbers to put in the model and which numbers to leave out. And that's really kind of an art to kind of figuring out what a good balance is of inputs that make the model not be overly optimistic or too pessimistic or wildly up and down from game to game, and to produce an actual usable number. And this works really well in sports where you have a lot of data points. NBA, NHL, baseball especially. But in sports where you have a small sample size, it can be really challenging because you don't want to overcorrect for a player like a backup running back that went off the week before, but the starter is returning. So you have to make sure that you account for that in your projections. So you got to be careful with sample sizes there. Now, there's another method that I've seen recently. I just saw this like 2 weeks ago. It's called the Baker engine. And this is designed by big sports data provider, real-time stats provider, way too expensive. You can't afford it. I can't afford it. Don't even try to find it. But it's similar to the machine learning where you build a model of what you think is a good model for a particular position or player. But this one takes that to another level, and then it runs it through effectively a simulator, a game simulator. So it's simulating many different data points, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of times. I don't know how many times they're running it. And this is called Monte Carlo simulation or Monte Carlo analysis, where you simulate a upcoming event like a sports game where there's rules and you can easily configure it to play by the rules, so that then you can make minor tweaks, like random tweaks to different types of variables that produce different types of outcomes. And then you get a spread of outcomes, and in the center is the most likely outcome, and then you have least likely, and then you have, these are your outlier situations. So when we're talking about accuracy, we can calculate the accuracy of an expert. That's pretty easy. We can calculate the accuracy of the wisdom of the crowd, the accuracy of the AI. It's pretty simple. You just use root mean square. That's typically the accuracy metric that is the most popular. So root mean square is just simply taking the projected value, the thing that you projected, minus the actual value, the thing that actually happened, and then summing those up and dividing by the number of samples that you have to get an average difference between all of the values that you predicted. And the larger that number, the worse it's performing. The smaller the number, the better it's performing. But here's the thing. Most sites aren't publishing that information. They're not telling you how accurate their projections are. And for a good reason, because most people don't know what the hell they're looking at. And even if you did know what the hell you're looking at, it's like, well, what number is a good number to say they're accurate? Because it's not going to be zero. The root mean square is not going to be zero, which would mean that you're predicting with absolute accuracy every single player across every single position, every single week. That's impossible. I can tell you, I run the numbers for lineup theory every single week. I update the RMSE for every single model that I have. And honestly, I couldn't tell you if it's accurate or not. I don't have anything to compare it to. Like, I can't compare it with Fantasy Pros or 4for4 or Fantasy Data or any of those others out there that aren't publishing their RMSE either. So it's hard to say. And again, I said at the top, projections are a comparative metric. It's a way to compare player A with player B in a relative manner. You can't look at that projection and say, well, this player is going to score this much and this player is going to score this much with any level of confidence, because the projections are guaranteed to be wrong. All the projections are telling you is, I think this player compared to this player is going to score more. This guy's going to score more than this guy, and that difference there is the magnitude of that comparison. And that's the difference between projections and rankings. Rankings kind of pull players into tiers. You put players into a group, like all these players are going to perform similarly to each other, and that's all you know. And then a projection goes a step further and tries to make it relative and tries to give you a measure of how much more, how much less players are going to perform week in and week out. So really, if you stop worrying about how fucking accurate projections are, and you start thinking about how are those projections calculated? How is that site or that expert calculating those projections? And come to your own conclusions about whether or not you want to use them or not. And my philosophy is the more unbiased you can make your projections, the more just cold, hard, stone cold numbers that you can find are the numbers that you should use. And really, and what I told my friend is, any projections will get you there. Just use any of them. Hell, just use rankings. It doesn't matter. All you need is to be able to compare a method to compare players week in and week out. And I mean, if you're playing league fantasy, You know, if you're playing like league fantasy football or fantasy basketball or whatever, you already know who your starting roster is every single day. You know those, you know, at least 80% of your roster. You know who you're going to play week in and week out. There's just a couple of positions. You know, maybe somebody's on a bye, or you always have your flex player is always questionable. I have no idea who to play at flex. Those are really the decisions that you have to make. Projections are really all you need. You don't need anything else. That's it. Projections are rankings. That's it. You can ignore every single data point that you come across that these big corp fantasy sites are trying to just throw the kitchen sink at you and develop all these stupid metrics that how do they help you make a lineup decision? How do they help you understand how one player is going to perform over another? How do they help you understand anything? They're just confusing you. They're just like, well, here's more because more is better. More is not better. Less is better. Less, one single number, projections. It's all you need. It's all you need. All you need is projections. Everything else, whatever. And it doesn't matter where you get it from. So the takeaway here, what I want you to take away from this video, if you made it this far in all these stupid little rants, you only need one number. You need projections. That's the most important. There's other numbers that we can talk about later, but for simple lineup decisions, week in and week out, projections are your best friend. And it doesn't matter where you get them from. And it doesn't matter how accurate they are. It doesn't matter because nobody can define accuracy when it comes to predicting the future because they're all wrong. All projections are wrong. They're all wrong. You don't know. Nobody knows. Everybody's an idiot when it comes to predicting the future. You, me, goddamn, well, maybe not Jesus. Jesus knows. Jesus knows the future. Don't you, Jesus? He doesn't know either. He's up there nude having cocaine orgies. I've been Aaron. This is Lineup Therapy. Tune in again next week when we'll talk about something else. We'll solve another sports problem. Have a great sports week.